Yo, dear listeners, hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today I have an interview with a brand new guest. This is Jack Radford-Smith, bodybuilding coach and dietitian. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is mine as well. You might not know, but I have been following your podcast and your content for years at this point, and I'm really impressed with the knowledge that you share and the integrity that you have as a coach. And I really appreciate your expertise as a dietitian. And today I want to harness that expertise to cover for my audience the topic of gut health, specifically for lifters, and within the realm of lifting for people who are interested in competitive or non-competitive bodybuilding. But the ice-breaking question that I always ask when I invite on a new guest is, who are you? What do you do? And why are you so awesome at it?
So yeah, as you introduced me, my name is Jack. I'm a dietitian, I'm a coach, and I think more recently I identify with being a business owner as well, and had the pleasure of having more team members with the Bodybuilding Dieticians, which has been amazing. And I do it because first of all, I love working with people and helping them with their health and fitness goals. Like I resonate very, very strongly with that. And I enjoy building things as well, and I enjoy being part of a team. So with the current sort of framework that I have at the moment, I'm able to accomplish all of those things together, and it brings me sort of immense joy and satisfaction and fulfillment to continue getting after it every single day. So as that saying goes, or I'll probably butcher the exact saying, but like if you enjoy what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And that's certainly holds true for myself. In terms of why I'm so awesome at it, well, I've been doing it for, what I think is a relatively long time now. And I've made plenty of mistakes along the way. I've had plenty of years to refine my craft as a dietitian and coach when I practice, but also in terms of the content that you see on Instagram, like that's certainly evolved over the years, and it's in a position now which I'm super happy with. So yeah, lots of mistakes made, but getting back up every time brings me to where I am today.
Thank you for the introduction, Jack. And the first question is going to be me throwing a curveball at you, because obviously I share the outline with you. And then, like maybe a few hours later, I thought I had another question to begin with, but I don't think it would be that surprising. I thought that we could start with definitions. And so I was going to ask you, how would you define the term gut health?
Yeah, no, that's a good question to start with. And I was actually thinking of that topic. So I'm glad that you asked it, because I think when many people look at or think about gut health, especially in the fitness industry, and I'll sort of say at the start of the podcast that a lot of, or the majority of the individuals that I work with are not strict bodybuilders. They're lifters. They're people who are passionate about their health and fitness and their body composition, their longevity, their gut health. So I really enjoy speaking more broadly about topics like this. So I think when many people think about gut health, or they immediately think of digestion, and they think of the absence of negative symptoms as good gut health. But imagine if we classified resistance training like that, or exercise like that. Just because we don't have aches and pains while we exercise, we suddenly means we're performing optimally, or we're having really, really good sessions, when of course that is not the case. Just because your quad doesn't hurt doesn't mean you're training your quads effectively. And it's the same with gut health as well. I would more broadly describe gut health as a few different factors. Like one, surely is good digestion, and being able to have predictability and comfortability with your digestion, but also, and probably the main component, which I won't get too clinical or scientific on, but is essentially giving your gut microbiome the fuel and diversity it needs to function optimally and holistically as well. So that could be the interaction of the gut-brain axes. So having a comfortable, stress-free environment to ensure that the gut-brain axis performs well, but that goes both ways. And also through sort of prebiotics, probiotics, fiber types, which I'm sure we'll get into today, ensuring that your gut microbes have the fuel and diversity they need to produce things like short-chain fatty acids and other byproducts, which has a whole host of benefits on the immune system, your systemic inflammation, your performance, and even body composition as well.
Thank you for explaining. Now, you said that gut health isn't just the absence of symptoms. And what I'm wondering is, in your view, how important it actually is for lifters who are passionate about body composition. In other words, are we talking about something that's overrated, underrated, or properly rated? And if you could explain your view as well.
I would say it's underrated for probably the main reason I stated earlier around it just being misinterpreted to the absence of negative symptoms. And in a bodybuilding context, that's quite common. Like, people will eat white rice because they can digest it efficiently. And there are circumstances in bodybuilding where that's important, where you need to prioritize digestion, especially when you're on higher amounts of food. And for lifters specifically, I would say that given that the gut microbiome has such strong impacts on your health, like your immune system, and even how we process certain macronutrients as well, like carbohydrates and fats and protein. It's not a direct linear impact on body composition, where if you took 10 people and you would be able to, the leanest people of those 10 would have the best gut health. It doesn't quite work like that, of course, because things like energy balance is still significantly more important for body composition. But more broadly, it certainly does influence body composition and performance, because someone who has a better immune system, someone who has better control over their systemic inflammation, someone who has greater comfortability of digestion while training and predictability, someone who is able to digest and absorb their food more efficiently, do that for long enough, and it's going to have a substantial impact on your results.
I would agree. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I break it down into very simple terms that have always made sense to me, we convert food and drink into energy that we use for all our metabolic processes, and gut health allows us to make that conversion and utilize those nutrients most efficiently. So that also makes our metabolism more efficient. And our metabolism is how we essentially function and improve our health and body composition.
Certainly, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
So, as you say, it might not be a direct impact. If you have the best gut health, you're definitely going to build a ton of muscle and lose fat easily. But as you say, I think the indirect impact is valuable nonetheless. And I would agree that it is underrated. I would also say that it is overrated in certain ways, namely, just like most supplements, to be honest. Supplements that are touted to be for gut health are vastly overrated, and we'll get to that later on, but I wanted to offer that insight already. I'll plant the seed that we'll get to later. Now, in your view, so first I want to give the listeners a bit of an insight into what we're going to cover. We're going to cover gut health specifically in the context of cutting and bulking, or a fat loss phase and a gaining phase in a surplus. But to start with, what are some basic ways that you, Jack, would advise to your clients to help them support their gut health that you might recommend across the board? Because of course, as we both know, each client is a bit different and might require more or less support in this, just like any other context. But if you had any basic tips that could help most people.
Yeah, for sure. I think getting a significant return on good gut health is done by a small amount of things consistently. And I think we could say the same about many aspects of health and fitness, like good sleep, good nutrition, exercise habits, and it's no different for gut health. So to list these, like a few different points, like one would be, and some of these I'll probably start with the bigger rocks first. So one would be your total fiber intake and your diversity of fiber intake. I would say beyond a certain point, your diversity of fiber intake. So basically, essentially different fiber types, also known as prebiotics, which is acts as the fertilizer for your gut bacteria. And the more diverse our fiber types, essentially means that we have different strains of gut bacteria which serve different functions and produce different end products like short chain fatty acids, butyrate being a common or a often sought after beneficial short chain fatty acid. And that's probably component number one. So for example, if someone is consuming 100 grams of fiber a day, but it's the same, let's say there's two different fiber types, it's unlikely, I'm not going to say this is for certainty because I don't think this has been studied, but it's unlikely to be more beneficial than someone having 40 grams of fiber but having 10 different fiber types. The individual having a diversity of fiber types will probably be have a healthier gut in quotations. And polyphenols is also a great component for a healthy gut as well. So essentially having polyphenols are essentially plant compounds with various benefits, and a good way of getting a diverse range of polyphenols is essentially colors. So green, yellow, purple, red, etc. And other important aspects for good gut health is staying hydrated, having a low stress environment, and sleeping well, and timing your meals appropriately as well. Essentially, your digestion is usually more active during the morning and typically less active in the evening, similar to it sort of goes with your chronotype or your circadian rhythm. So if someone, typically our circadian rhythm follows the pattern of sleeping during the nighttime and then being awake during the daytime. So if someone is consuming a lot of their food in biological nights, then typically that's not ideal for digestion or maybe more holistically gut health. There are, of course, a number of other different things around gut health, but those are some of the bigger rocks.
Great. I have a couple of questions to follow up. So one thing that you've mentioned a couple of times is a low stress environment. And I would like to ask this question. A lot of people in our modern society are stressed all the time. And realistically, it is not within their control to reduce the number of stressors that they have. So I'm wondering if you cannot have a low stress environment, would it be helpful to be in a situation where you have the tools to manage all of the stressors that you have more effectively?
Mm-hmm.
Would that be similarly equivalent?
Maybe elaborate what you mean by the tools to manage your stresses. So maybe give a real world example.
Okay, so I'm going to compare the two conditions. The first condition you mentioned, you are able to surround yourself with a relatively low number of stressors. In the second condition, and this is, in a way, this low number is arbitrary. In the second condition, you have slightly more stressors, but you also know how to essentially regulate your emotions and process them. So you know that when you're really stressed, you make time to go for a walk, to do some meditation, to journal, to spend time with a loved one, whatever it is that fills your cup. And as a result, you are able to manage those stressors well. You don't feel like the house is on fire, essentially. Would you say that the two conditions are equivalent?
Personally, no. I would say that being able to regulate your stress through different mechanisms, whether that's like walking or exercise, as you said, or seeing a psychologist or cognitive behavioral therapy, or even just a good diet. Like the beautiful aspect of the gut-brain axis is that it goes both ways. So like your brain will influence your gut and your gut will influence your brain as well. So having a nutritious diet which fuels your gut, one aspect that I didn't mention in the previous question was probiotics, but that's a consideration for good gut health as well. But I definitely think managing your stresses is an important consideration for sure, and definitely has a positive impact.
That makes sense. So in your view, having a low stress environment would be pinnacle. And then let's say that in the middle, you have managing a high stress situation well, and then at the bottom it would be being in a high stress environment and not having those tools. Would that be an accurate representation of your view?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can personally, like I'm a believer that you can still have a high stress environment, but manage it in a way that you are not stressed and you have low stress. Like I do think that's achievable. There are always going to be times where you are more stressed, and I can certainly resonate with that. But there will also, if you manage it appropriately and you have the correct tools and frameworks at your disposal, like you can be lower stress.
I see. Then I think I didn't explain my question very clearly, because now that you're giving me that answer, we're basically saying the same thing. So,
Yeah.
okay, I understand that now. Thank you. Okay, so moving away from stress, I want to talk a little bit more about prebiotics and probiotics, just to give people an idea of, practically speaking, what are we talking about? What can we shop at the store to get some of both, essentially? Can you give a few examples of what prebiotic fibers would be versus probiotic fibers?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So probiotic is not necessarily referring to a fiber type per se, but probiotic is essentially the live organisms that are already existing in your gut. And they are often in food products produced through fermentation. So there are foods that contain probiotics. And you can also just purchase probiotics in general through supplements, which we may get to in a latter question. But you do have to be careful about certain probiotic containing foods, because although from a cultural or layperson standpoint, it may holistically contain probiotics, you need to be careful that it's not pasteurized. So if, let's say, let's list a few. So we have like yogurt, we have sauerkraut, we have kimchi, we have kefir, basically anything that undergoes fermentation. But for example, if your sauerkraut or kimchi is on the shelf, then it's room temperature essentially, which will kill your probiotics. So you just want to make sure that your probiotic containing foods, like for the most part, they will be refrigerated or cold, and ideally not having undergone pasteurization, which will kill any positive bacteria. Another common one is fermented tofu, which the name escapes me at the moment. Maybe you know the name of it. It's a popular protein source. Yeah, it'll come to me.
It will probably come to either of us at some point.
Yeah. But that then brings us on to prebiotics. Like the description I gave earlier is essentially like a fertilizer for your gut bacteria. So it's fuel to encourage diversification and feeding certain strains of gut bacteria, which then proliferate and breed essentially. And we always have a certain sort of low grade amount of lots of different types of gut bacteria, but it's really the prebiotics and mainly prebiotics, but also the polyphenols and other plant compounds that we eat, which will make those strains proliferate and dominate. And that's where we, like, for example, if someone has a microbiome test done, they will have maybe a certain amount of like good bacteria and not so good bacteria, which will kind of influence a state of gut like dysbiosis, which is an unfavorable situation, or a more favorable situation, which is often described as like a symbiotic relationship. So we can get into the weeds of like different fiber types. We've got like resistant starch, we've got insoluble fiber, we've got soluble fiber, and not all fiber types will be as beneficial from a prebiotic standpoint. So typically it's the soluble fiber, which acts more so as a prebiotic, and whereas insoluble fiber more so passes through and it kind of forms the bulk of the stool, whereas soluble fiber absorbs water, hence the name soluble, and it helps with sort of passage of the stool and hydration as well. So fiber has lots of different benefits, not just for your gut microbiome, but also for like how efficient your digestion process is.
That makes perfect sense, and thank you for pulling me up when I said probiotic fibers. And in my head, I was like, "What am I saying?" But it was just in the moment when I'm talking. Sometimes my mouth moves faster than my brain. Anyway, That was super informative. In terms of hydration, how would you advise that people check whether they are properly hydrated?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. There's a more complicated way of essentially monitoring how much sweat you lose or water you lose during exercise, and then multiplying it by 1.5, and then drinking that back. So people can weigh themselves before and after the gym, assuming that their body weight change would be sweat loss. Depends on what type of exercise you're doing, how hot it is, and like for example, here in Australia, where it gets incredibly humid, especially in Brisbane, and it can get hot, you typically do sweat quite a lot. The other way is just monitoring your urine color. So ideally, you want it very slightly yellow or slash clear. And of course, the more yellow or dark it is, the more dehydrated you are, essentially. So you by the time, the thing with assessing urine color is by the time you are turning into dark yellow or orange, even like you definitely don't want orange, that's for sure. But unless you've had like a Barocca or something, in which case like your certain B vitamins would change the color of your urine. But by that point, you're probably already a little dehydrated. So you want to avoid getting to that point, essentially.
Yes, that makes sense. I usually like the urine color chart, the Armstrong urine color chart. As you say, once the urine is a certain color, well, you're already dehydrated. However, I find that it is helpful for future reference. So if you keep tracking it for a few days and you gradually drink more, eventually your urine will be relatively clear all day. And that's when you know you've hit your, let's call it your optimal hydration or fluid intake, at least relative to the amount of activity that you're doing at this moment in time. And then you roughly keep it within that range, and you can also stop tracking your urine. So I think it's helpful in hindsight, even though you can't really act on it once it's already a certain color.
Yeah. It's kind of like a body weight. Like you use it as biofeedback and you use it to influence what you do. Yeah. So it's definitely a useful tool.
Precisely. So then to recap the tips that you have to broadly support or improve gut health. You've mentioned total fiber intake and your diversity of fiber intake, and particularly the importance of prebiotic fiber, polyphenols, probiotics, staying hydrated, having a low stress environment, sleeping well, and timing your meals appropriately. Now, what I want to do is pivot and focus a little bit more on cutting and bulking, so respectively a deficit and gaining muscle in a surplus. So if we're talking about a deficit or a cutting phase first, what are some common gut health issues that you, Jack, have personally encountered, either in your own bodybuilding experience or with your clients during a deficit phase? And for these common gut health issues, if you could also offer some practical solutions.
Yeah, certainly. So I've been quite blessed myself with gut health. Like I am, for people who know me well, like which wouldn't be your listeners, of course, like they would know that my father's actually a gastroenterologist. So for those that don't know, that's basically a gut doctor. So I've always had a upbringing of a particular attention to detail around the gut and good digestion, and I think that's been a significant player in terms of my passion for nutrition and now gut health myself. So, and I think it's a nice complement. It's a complementary relationship of medicine and nutrition combined. Sometimes it can, for medicine, it can. Doctors like to treat through medicine, and dietitians like to treat through nutrition and food where possible. So it's a nice combination. And of course, the goal is to never have to need medicine for your gut, though. So getting to the question, but it's pretty common to experience gut disturbances in a deficit. Depends on the extent of the deficit and depends on the individual. Like if someone has IBD, which is inflammatory bowel disease, or if someone has IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, like that will sort of probably increase the likelihood of certain disturbances happening. But there are ways to manage it. So one hurdle that people go into is just slower digestion in general. One of the adapted processes of the gut is to slow down digestion because it's a energy intensive process, just like anything else that goes on in the body. And the body likes to kind of conserve energy by slowing that down. We can't really stop that. So we just need to be aware of it. And I think just being aware of it, full stop, allows us to probably not stress about it as much. And secondly would be just general gastrointestinal disturbances, for example, bloating or flatulence or constipation, associated with a couple different things. Like the thing with gut-related symptoms is that they generally are fairly benign, like they're not necessarily going to kill you per se, but they're uncomfortable, and they can be due to a few different reasons. So like one is just overconsumption of fiber. Like if someone's in a deficit and they suddenly have a heap of cognac noodles and their fiber goes from 30 grams a day to 90 grams a day, chances are they're going to experience some extra gut-related symptoms. Secondly would be not vice versa, not having enough fiber. Like if someone's food drops and they're relying on 400 grams of carbohydrates a day to hit their 30 grams of fiber, but now their carbs are slashed in half and they don't quite eat enough vegetables, then they are going to have insufficient fiber. Another big one is diet foods, which I talk a lot about on my various channels, and it's just something to be careful about when there are certain additives to your food, such as sugar alcohol. So any sort of sweetener that ends in ol, like mannitol or xylitol or sorbitol, they basically are only partially digested in the intestine, and they are fermented, and they cause gas and flatulence and bloating. So often the juice isn't worth the squeeze, is what I say. And like we could go into a whole nother conversation about food focus and food noise and diet foods, but yeah, they aren't particularly great for like digestive comfortability, that's for sure.
I have a couple of questions here to follow up. You've mentioned overconsumption of fiber and also not getting enough fiber. And I wanted to have some clarity on this. When you're saying over-consuming or under-consuming, do you mean deviating from baseline or up or down? So, for example, when you're not in a deficit, before you start a diet, you're eating 30 grams of fiber. Now you start your deficit and all of a sudden you're now eating 60 grams of fiber. So you're doubling that overnight, and vice versa. If you're not eating enough, you go from 30, you drop down to 10. Is that what you're referring to? Or do you mean that even there is a certain threshold for fiber that you would, or a range that you would recommend? And actually you could answer both and give the range if you have any.
Yeah, for sure. So I do mean a little bit of both, and particularly going from a normal amount that your guts are adapted to, because the gut is incredibly adaptive. Like that's a key point to mention here, is that unlike maybe other aspects of your physiology, the gut can adapt to a different fiber type. It can adapt to different foods, different circumstances. And that's one of the amazing aspects of it. Even your microbiome can shift and adapt in a matter of days of changing your diet. And so going from like your normal fiber type to a higher fiber type, it doesn't necessarily mean that fiber type, the higher amount, is too much forever, but just that acute shift, as you mentioned, can cause some gastrointestinal symptoms, because you're essentially kind of filling up your gastrointestinal tract with things that are harder to digest, to put it fairly simply. And same for going to a lower fiber amount. But I would say the unique aspect of going to a lower fiber amount is that it's just genuinely not that great for gut health, because you don't have that fertilizer, those prebiotics to fertilize your gut bacteria, but also you don't have anything to kind of push through your digestive tract. There is, of course, an amount which will vary for everyone. I consume a lot of fiber per day, and probably like even up until like the triple digits, like occasionally, and I'm fine with that. Like my gut has adapted to it over time. But some people might have 50 grams of fiber a day and be like, okay, I've tried this for a couple months and I'm just getting GI symptoms, like, and no matter what I do, like I just can't have more than 50 grams of fiber. Quickly, in terms of the amount, the like 25 grams for females, 30 grams for males, or like 12 to 15 grams per 1,000 calories are often amounts that you'll hear. Particularly the lower amounts, they're more so just general recommendations, often for chronic disease prevention. It doesn't necessarily mean optimality. It's kind of like getting a blood test from the doctor and saying, "Oh, I'm in the reference range for my vitamin D. Amazing," but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're in an optimal range. It just means that you're like in an appropriate, like you're not going to die range essentially, or have ill health effects.
That makes sense. A bit like protein as well. The RDA is different from optimality for body composition, for example.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
So would you say that in your experience, is the ability to tolerate fiber in some way related to one or both of these factors? How many calories you eat in a day? Because Jack, I know that you are on a very high calorie intake, even for maintenance. And also training your gut, because obviously I am aware of the concept of gut training for endurance athletes, for example, whereby they train their gut to consume carbohydrates, for example, in the context of long runs, to be able to do it without having GI distress in the middle of said run.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good question around whether it's associated with the calorie amount. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. I would have to look more into that. But my gut instinct per se is to say no. Like I don't think it would be. And like my maintenance is quite high. Like it's around 4 to 4.5K. But I'm also very active. So yeah, I would have to do some. I'll look into that after this. Like I do know people in my family, for example, who eat significantly less food than me, who also eat like a similar proportion of fiber to their calorie amount, and they're also fine as well. So I do think it's more like gut adaptation and gut training over time, so that your gut bacteria get more efficient at basically metabolizing certain fiber types, essentially, so that you don't produce the same sort of negative symptoms. But I do also think there are certain individuals like who are just more susceptible to, for example, FODMAPs, like which stand for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, which are types of carbohydrates found in various foods, which like is pretty common when it comes to IBS. Like that's one of the main culprits for why people get IBS symptoms.
Yes, I suppose as I was thinking about it, it could be a useless question to ask because there are way too many factors involved in gut health, including genetics. How do we know if somebody's better handling fiber just because their genetic makeup makes it so, as opposed to because they also handle well a lot of calories or fewer calories? So I suppose that wasn't a particularly useful question. I was just curious, and I'm a nerd, so sometimes I come up with these.
Well,
So something else. Go ahead.
It's a philosophical question. It allows you to try and think outside the box, and sometimes that's where the best answers are produced. So, yeah, because I think especially when they're, it's especially when, but I know what you mean around gut health when literally everything affects the gut, and they're kind of like the brain. Everything affects the brain. So like it's hard to give an answer in that sort of scenario.
Yes, exactly. But I appreciate you flattering me. Plus, this is my podcast, so flattery is always welcome. Anyway, so we've talked about overconsumption and underconsumption of fiber. I'm wondering about diet foods specifically. You've mentioned those that contain additives like sugar alcohols and polyols. Could you give specific examples of these foods, that in case people aren't really aware of what you're talking about?
For sure. So sugar-free chewing gum is a big one, or like usually they use sugar alcohols there. There is one sugar alcohol, I believe it's xylitol, although I could be wrong, which is actually metabolized in the small intestine, so it doesn't reach the large intestine. So people are usually a bit more safe with that one, but the others typically do produce more gut symptoms. But sugar-free maple syrup, diet ice cream, some diet sodas as well, protein bars, those are pretty common foods where you'll see it. Diet jelly is a big one as well. So when I'm assessing a client's diet and they are not getting consistent weight trends, or they're experiencing gut discomfort or constipation, then I'll typically get them to send me their dietary recall and try and sort of, usually that's not always, but usually it is a culprit, especially in comp prep when food focus is elevated and we want to be able to have that sort of palatability or high palatability food while also hitting our calories as well.
Great, thank you for explaining, and this is going to be really helpful. One question I have on these foods is, would you say that the poison is in the dose, or would you suggest avoiding them altogether?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to that. Like, one is the food focus and the food noise, which is more so related to the brain, and then we've also got the gut as well. So I'm sure there is a dose where people's symptoms are minor, but I think for most competitors, it's easier to have none than to have some. But it does also depend on the diet food as well, and depends how sensitive they are to those sugar alcohols and it's not just sugar alcohols, it's also for example fibers as well. Like, they are often adding in starches and fibers and gums, which also wreak a little bit of havoc on digestion at times as well. So it's not just the sweeteners. But I often use a mosquito bite analogy, which you may have heard before, where someone will have a diet food and it's kind of like giving your mosquito bite a little bit of an itch. And then does that help the mosquito bite? No, like, you get a little bit of respite for a couple seconds and then it comes back. And then if you keep itching it, it starts to bleed, and no one wants that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And now we've talked plenty about digestion during a fat loss phase. Let's pivot to a massing phase in a surplus. What are some common gut health issues that you see yourself, or, well, probably not you, since you have good gut health, as you said, but maybe your clients encounter, and how would you address those with some practical suggestions?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one in a surplus is sometimes is not felt, but is more so happening behind the scenes, which is, I mean, can still happen in a deficit, but I just didn't cover it as much in a deficit. But it's essentially, and something that I have actually experienced big time in a surplus myself, is appetite diminishing significantly, and as a result of that, essentially moving to more highly processed or highly refined foods to achieve my calorie targets, but at the expense of diet quality, at the expense of fiber types and prebiotics, etc. So I was prioritizing energy intake, but sacrificing diet quality. And you may not feel the effects of that. It's kind of like good sleep. You may not feel the difference between like 7 to 8 hours of sleep, but like there is potentially a difference there in terms of benefit. So that's one thing, is like, because of the calorie amount that you're on, you may say no to that serving of broccoli, or you may say no to the mixed fruit because you'd rather have more white rice in general. And that was definitely a position I was in personally, and some of my clients are in, where their appetite is so low that the thought of having vegetables, I will say for myself, I did still have vegetables. Like, my diet objectively was good, but I do hold myself to a relatively high standard, and it doesn't even come close to what my diet is like at the moment in terms of diversity and quality. So the other point is just general food volume, and the amount that people need to eat is more so an impact on, I would say, digestion, potentially a little less so on gut health per se, but of course the two kind of mesh together a little bit. But like timing training around the volume of meals and just getting the certain amount of food volume down in general, it can be a challenge, especially when appetite is low, and just needs strategies around that. So choosing nutrient dense, low volume foods, liquid meals, or like, for example, smoothies when appropriate, and just finding ways to be able to complement both energy density and food volume and nutrient diversity together. Another thing that I do with certain clients and myself is I have my fat intake very high. So my fat intake at the moment is like 150 grams a day, and my carbohydrates closer to 500, my protein around 250, and so kind of high across the board. But imagine if fat intake was like 1 gram per kilo of body weight, which would be like 85 to 90. It would mean my carbs would have to go sky high, which again would make it more challenging to get in the carbs that I would prefer to eat. So whereas it's much easier to get in quality sources of dietary fat, which will benefit your gut health, and obviously dietary fat is much more low volume. It's much more energy dense, like extra virgin olive oil, nuts, seeds, etc.
It's actually really interesting because I have some clients on pretty extreme calorie intakes in a surplus relative to their maintenance, probably because of increased NEAT levels that they're not even aware of. Those people that in the fitness community we term hard gainers, basically. And I will definitely implement what you just said of increasing fat intake. Because my understanding is you clearly have plenty of carbohydrates, I'm assuming, at 3 to 5 grams per kilograms of body weight, if not more already. So your needs for resistance training are well covered. And when you have those needs covered, then you increase the fats to avoid continuing to subject the gut to a lot of carbohydrates that volume-wise and also potentially fiber-wise might be too much to handle. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. I think the points you made, especially about like resistance training not being overly glycogen depleting, and people just like I'm not sure how much validity there is to this model, but some people do like to say, okay, dietary fat is stored as fat, carbohydrates are stored as glycogen. It's much more inefficient for glycogen to be turned into fat stores, which I can understand that argument, but I think if it comes at the cost of everything that we've talked about, like it's probably not worthwhile. I think it's better just to increase your fat, and it also allows you to have access to all these amazing nutritious fat sources, which I think people don't eat enough of, such as the ones I referenced.
Yes, that makes perfect sense, and it is an interesting take. Like you, I am aware of that. I believe it's only a theory at the moment. I've not seen any research to really support that, whereby, as you say, fat is immediately stored as fat, whereas carbohydrates have to go through they're stored as glycogen, well, first glucose in the bloodstream, then glycogen in muscles and organs, and finally, in the case of a calorie surplus, they are stored as fat. So the belief seems to be if you have more carbs, then they will be less likely to be stored as fat. And I like you, I find that interesting, but also at the same time, I wonder how much of a difference will that actually make when you are purposefully in a surplus, whereby energy balance ultimately will trump, I believe, macronutrient distribution. And also, as you just mentioned, which I hadn't really thought of in that depth before, if the carbohydrate intake is coming at the expense of gut health, is it really worth it? So then, refining my thought process, I would think if somebody's handling carbohydrates really well and they also prefer them, then I don't think there's a problem in increasing carbs and keeping fats to 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. But if somebody's really struggling with their gut health and they are on a ton of carbs, then bringing those down to a level that won't cause issues with lifting performance might be beneficial, and then increase fats from those dietary fat sources that you've mentioned. Yeah, that is a really interesting thought process. Thanks for that.
My pleasure.
Now, I want to focus on the final question that I have. I referenced supplements earlier, and I'm keen to cover this because personally, I think that the supplement industry is really smart at marketing. and to the point where supplements have become pretty overrated. There is now a supplement for pretty much every condition under the sun, and not all of them, or even the majority of them, have the evidence base that they are purported to have by these marketers. So I want to cover supplements for gut health, and basically I would like your view on whether they are overrated, underrated, or properly rated, and why. And the first would be the first two: prebiotics supplements and probiotics supplements. What do you think of them?
Yeah, so let's start off with prebiotics. So I think that I would say I'm fairly neutral on them and it's really quite circumstantial. I don't think they're maybe very slightly overrated, but I mean, I could and ah about that answer. So I think if someone is not having enough fiber or enough diversity in their fiber types, then I think a prebiotic supplement, which is a good prebiotic supplement, which has a lot of different fiber types or prebiotic types in there, then it will no doubt improve their gut diversity and their like gut health in quotations. But if someone is already having a great distribution through their diet, and they're having lots of different colors and different fiber types, then I don't think a prebiotic supplement will do very much, because unlike other supplements like caffeine or creatine, like in the case of creatine, you can't just suddenly choose to eat enough of creatine containing food. Like, it's just not going to happen. Whereas with prebiotics, if your diet is set up appropriately, then you can already quite easily benefit from prebiotics rather than taking a supplement. In terms of probiotics, I think at the moment that's I feel quite firmly that it's overrated. There are certainly some, if you pay a lot of money, there is some good probiotic supplements which can be used in certain situations. Like if you do want to restore certain types of gut bacteria after like taking antibiotics, for example, which tend to wipe out certain strains of your gut bacteria, and you want to repopulate those, then certain ones can be good. But at this stage, a lot of what's on the market is either very singular strains, or they are amounts that are just not sort of practically appropriate for like a real world example, or they struggle to sort of survive the acid in your stomach and get to the large intestine. And also some of them are not live cultures either, which can be challenging if they're kind of similar to buying sauerkraut off the shelf and expecting the organisms in there to be alive when unfortunately they're not. And so there are a few different considerations. I would say it's more about choosing the correct probiotic supplement and spending an appropriate amount of money on it. Like, rather than, let's give again creatine as an example, because that's like the gold standard. You can go anywhere and grab creatine off the shelf and it's going to do its job, but not the same for probiotics.
That makes sense. So with probiotics, my understanding is that we have some evidence to support specific strains helping with specific conditions. But as you say, you need to also purchase the right probiotic that is actually probiotic supplement, whereby the strains will actually reach your large intestine and do their job, which can cost more money than the average probiotic that you probably find in your supplement store. And those average probiotics typically tend to seem really good because they'll talk about having a gazillion CFUs. So you're like, wow, with all of this million of bacteria, certainly this will be good, when actually we don't have so much evidence to support that this bunch of strains is necessarily going to do anything to your gut.
Yeah, we actually know a surprisingly small amount about the different strains and what they're exactly associated with from a clinical outcome perspective. There's actually I can't quote the name of this study, unfortunately, but there was a very recent study done by some scientists in Europe, I believe, and it essentially was the largest data set on the gut microbiome samples to date. And they essentially ranked hundreds of different gut bacteria species in terms of like the top 50 and then the middle amount and then the bottom 50. And this so far is the clearest research we have from my knowledge to date on, okay, which strains are beneficial and which strains are associated with less helpful outcomes. So I do think that research is going to inform quite a lot of movements in the gut health space to come, because we actually have a bit more knowledge about the certain strains which are associated with more helpful outcomes.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Now, next supplement I wanted to ask you about is greens powders. What do you think of those?
Yeah, so I would say overrated. I won't spend too long on greens powders, but I think if greens powders has like different prebiotic types in it, which is not as common from a greens powder, then it may have some benefit, again, for certain individuals, basically for people who don't eat their fruits and vegetables. But like otherwise for gut health, I would say no, there's no major reason why. Because like ideally I would say these answers in the context of someone who has a good foundational diet, because we can't necessarily assume that these supplements, like I think you could always devise a circumstance where there's going to be some use case for this supplement if you constructed a magical situation. But if we set the average individual as someone who has a relatively good diet, which I think we can maybe say for your average listener, then I would say no, greens powders are not helpful in the context of gut health.
That makes sense. I'm wondering, are there any supplements that you would consider for gut health that I've not mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple do come to mind. There are like L-glutamine, for example, is an amino acid which there are some context-dependent situations for helping with the gut lining, but that is usually in quite a high dose for a short period. So often people take 5 grams a day, which the literature, I believe, is more so quoting 30-ish grams a day for a short period to help with the lining of the intestine. And so that's a circumstantial one, which can be beneficial. Another one is psyllium husk, which is an interesting one because technically psyllium husk is just one fiber type. So from the context of diversity, it's not amazing. But for constipation treatment and in some circumstances helping with IBS, it can be useful because it draws water into the stool and helps with relieving constipation. So that is one that I do recommend on occasion for people who struggle with constipation. I do think if someone did want to invest in a fiber supplement, like they can be useful. Like again, circumstantially, if someone just hates vegetables, they hate fruits, and they're just not going to eat them, then, which sometimes that does happen, then investing in a good fiber supplement which has multiple different fiber types and polyphenols as well would be a good investment if someone's just not going to eat the appropriate amount of food or type of food. If I was to list one more, and there are some other things as well, like peppermint tea, for example, like helping with some IBS symptoms, but like I won't necessarily list some of the smaller rocks. So the final one would be almost like a diversity mix, which you could either interpret as, it's kind of like debating whether whey protein is a food or whether it's a supplement. But I would say a diversity mix is essentially an amalgamation of different foods and ingredients to give you more diversity in your diet. So this can easily be made at home, or you can purchase it elsewhere, but you could chuck in different nuts and seeds, different herbs and spices, and you could be one you keep in the fridge, which would be like I've made one similar to sauerkraut, which you just chuck in as many things as you want in there in terms of herbs, spices, different vegetables and you ferment it, and like that's almost like a supplement in and of itself. And then you can do the equivalent, which you store in the pantry. So although not a traditional supplement, like I thought that would be useful to mention. Often you do see some like gut powders and gut drinks, which again, there may be some ingredients in those which are circumstantially useful, but we at the end of the day, we have to think about mechanistically, like what are they helping with? Are they trying to relieve constipation? Are they trying to improve our digestion? Whereas I come back to the point of gut health. The essence of gut health for me is having a diverse microbiome and a thriving microbiome full of the strains of gut bacteria that we want to encourage, that have health promoting effects. And at the end of the day, that's going to be done through having a diverse amount of plants to fertilize and grow our gut bacteria strains.
Before we wrap up with the final question, there's something that we've not covered that I wanted to ask about. We've mentioned the importance of fiber diversity, and you've offered your suggestions on what fiber range to aim for. I'm wondering what you think about eating 30 plants per week or aiming for 30 plants per week, and why might that be important in your view?
Yeah, it's a great question. So 30 plants a week is often the sort of touted or recommended diversity range to aim for. The reason it's beneficial and why I would advocate for it is it, again, exposes you to different fiber types and polyphenols, and even just from a micronutrition standpoint, different micronutrients. So it is almost like a fail-safe or an insurance policy that you're doing your gut a service, and you're promoting good gut health in that sense. So it might seem like a lot, but there are some very sort of strategic and practical tips to get there, like mixed fruit, mixed vegetables, 4 or 5 bean mixes, even nut butter with different nuts or different seeds thrown in there. So, and even the diversity jars that I was alluding to. So herbs and spices count as well. So be generous with your herbs and spices, and before you know it, like I think most people, if they approach it similar to how they might approach a training plan, like and just sort of have some things that are easily accessed and ready to go, like they can hit that number pretty easily.
And as far as you know, is there a specific amount to hit for it to qualify as one of your 30 plants? Such as in England, we have the goal of eating your 5 a day, and one of your 5 a days, we're talking about fresh fruit and vegetables, would be equivalent to 75 to 80 grams. Is there anything like that for the 30 plants goal?
Yeah, it's often a pushback on the 30 plants is like, does my like half a teaspoon of paprika count? But there is no defined amounts, and I think that's mainly just to encourage diversity in any shape or form. And short answer is no, but it's I would be interested in more research on that topic, like whether there is, it would be very hard to do, but like whether there is an amount that is meaningful for certain food types like herbs and spices, vegetables, fruits, but they might have to do that in vitro before they then do it in humans. I'm not sure.
Yeah, indeed. And as you say, different categories of food will be handled differently because, for example, with fruit and vegetables, as I mentioned, 75 to 80 grams would be for fresh ones. But if you're having dried ones where the amount of nutrients is concentrated in a smaller quantity, the recommended quantity is about 30 grams. So obviously that's different than herbs and spices, and fresh and fruit and vegetables would be the same. So that would be quite interesting to me as well. In any event, Jack, I really appreciate the time that you've given me today and also to my audience. And I'm wondering, to wrap up the podcast, where can people connect with you if they'd like to inquire about coaching or if they just like to follow your content?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure being on, and really enjoyed it. Any opportunity to talk about gut health, I'll gladly take it up. So you can follow me for more content-based nutrition work on the Bodybuilding Dieticians, which is on Instagram. Also a website as well, where we post blog articles on lots of different topics. And more personally, you can follow me at Jack Radford-Smith on Instagram, which again, a mixture of educational stuff on there, but documenting my own sort of journey as a just through my health and fitness endeavors and some business stuff too.
Excellent. As always, dear listeners and watchers on YouTube, viewers rather on YouTube, watchers sounds really weird. Anyway, as always, all of the links will be in the show notes. Jack, thank you again for coming on. Dear listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time.